That's so funny because by contrast, the first sessions of D&D that I ever played, I almost got murdered by what's called a shambling mound, which is just like a hill that is animated.
Just an angry bush.
It's just...
Hello and welcome to Can't Let It Go. It's an audio PowerPoint party. My name is Matt and I use he, him pronouns.
My name is AC. I use they, them pronouns.
And I'm Alex. I use they, them pronouns too.
Hell yeah.
Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
We're so excited. Today we are going to talk about one of my favorite topics, Dungeons and Dragons. Before we get into it, Matt, I know that we wanted to give folks like a kind of a review. Why are you seeing 2 episodes in your feed right now? All of that.
Yeah, just in case you listened to this episode and you didn't listen to the previous one in the feed, the reason you're getting 2 episodes today is, well, one, because it's Pride Month and
Happy gay.
we love you. The other reason is that we had originally planned to do an Andor Season 2 episode last month. And for a bunch of reasons, including but not exclusively because Disney Plus is on the BDS list, but also because we kind of watched it and like felt we didn't really have much to say about the season, decided not to do that one. And then honestly, coming up with more topics to talk to you about was a struggle at the time for how busy the two of us were. So instead, today you're getting the episode about The Last Word, my favorite cocktail. And you're getting an episode led by AC with one of their GMs about Dungeons and Dragons.
That's me.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly right. So Alex and I play at the same Dungeons and Dragons table. And I think I'm going to start by giving folks context on what is Dungeons and Dragons. Although I do feel like if you haven't heard of Dungeons and Dragons, you've maybe been living under a rock at this point.
And you're definitely not listening to this podcast.
And you probably don't listen to this podcast, right? Okay.
Your rock doesn't have Wi-Fi and you are very living in a better timeline. Congratulations.
Yeah. So if you've never played D&D before, here's the rundown. If you are a seasoned player, do not fact check me. I did my own research, but I don't care.
We're just here to talk shit.
Yeah, that's right. So Dungeons and Dragons is most often described as a fantasy tabletop role-playing game. It was originally published in 1974 by Gary Gygax and Dave Aronson. This is now published by Wizards of the Coast, aka also now Hasbro. And if you are curious about some of the like intellectual property pieces of D&D, I know that there's at least one nugget in a previous episode where we talked about this. And also there is so much on the internet that you can read about the discourse about how Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast specifically has tried to own entirely creative properties that people have been playing using their game system for a long time.
They also suck as the owners of Magic the Gathering, to be clear.
Yeah.
So that's my side of the world.
Yeah. Capitalism ruins everything.
Everything.
But I will say this is why many creators now, or players even, and not why now, it's not why what's called homebrew exists, but it is why so many people play what's called homebrewed rules or settings or characters or whatever. So basically, homebrewing is when you say, here's the basic rule set. I'm going to bend it here or make an adjustment there and create something that is not laid out in one of the books published by Wizards of the Coast or their affiliated properties. Wizards of the Coast publishes rule books, but they also publish like full game settings. You know, there are things that we think of as iconic D&D characters or battles, things like Strahd, who is a lich, aka a vampire, basically. Well, yeah, that's not true. It's not a vampire. I saw Alex's face. Whatever. How do you explain a lich, Alex?
A lich would be a high-powered wizard who sought immortality to the point where he stripped his soul into a phylactery and now regularly feeds it souls. It is not great, I will say, from a please respect to Jewish people perspective. But a lot of things in D&D aren't great from please respect other culture perspectives. So that's a bigger story.
It does sound like within the lore, though, it is just a soul vampire.
More or less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It needs souls to survive and takes them from other beings in the same way that a vampire would take blood. If you're looking for an easy explanation.
Yeah. Okay.
We have emotional vampires, soul vampires, blood vampires, all respected in New Orleans. Look it up. Don't talk to me about it.
You forgot sex vampires. Those also exist. Okay. So homebrewing and like the general rule system often use, well, the general rule system uses a variety of die from a D4 all the way up to a D100. So that's D4, D6, D8, D12, D20, and D100 to help characters through three primary things, which Wizards of the Coast say are the pillars of the game: social interactions, exploration, and combat. And so, you know, again, the reason that I said if you're living under, I think you might be living under a rock if you haven't heard of Dungeons and Dragons at this point, is because D&D is having a huge cultural moment, though it's always been something that's part of the cultural zeitgeist. Whether it was, you know, in the 70s and 80s, the jokes about people who lived in their parents' basement before we were making jokes about people who lived in their parents' basement being on the internet. If from the Satanic Panic, right, which Dungeons and Dragons did play no small part in, because of connections between people who were involved in some of the killings that sparked the Satanic Panic and the way that they played Dungeons and Dragons. Just like ideas around this fantasy system have existed as part of the cultural conversation for a long time. Anything else like level setting, Alex, that you want to like explain about D&D that you think we might talk about before we get into like why you and I play D&D?
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to mention is why looking at homebrew and why it's so important is a lot of the IP issues that Wizards of the Coast, or that we have issues with Wizards of the Coast with now, have been baked into Dungeons and Dragons since the very beginning. So as Gary Gygax invented, I say in quotes, Dungeons and Dragons, immediately after that, his company like pushed everybody out, made Dungeons and Dragons in the rule book, and then created another company called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which bought out that company. And so it's always been not only like a turf war, but also like, how can I keep this intellectual property clamped down so tightly so people have to pay me specifically to play it, I think is throughout all of D&D's history since it was first created. And I think that's something that we always need to remember and look at as the legacy, along with a lot of other issues that Dungeons and Dragons, the Monster Manual, has. It's always been an issue, and we've always, as people, found creative ways to go around it.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that. That's wild that some of like the things that you hear most about as like an outsider with D&D are there from the beginning.
Yeah.
They're from the beginning. I don't know if we do other podcast shout outs on this podcast.
Absolutely.
Go for it.
But Behind the Bastards did, I believe, a 2 or 4 part series on the origins of Dungeons and Dragons, and I found it very approachable and very entertaining, while also looking at how harsh and difficult the process was.
And I also think that that's so interesting because so much of what is, and this is what we're really going to get into now, right? So much of what is magical or special or important about D&D is the way that it is collaborative, imaginative, and like really driven toward creating something new with your friends. And so it's like this very interesting backdrop that there is this very strict perspective of purchasing and capitalism like running through the history of the game. So, Alex, I would love for you to also tell folks, how did we meet?
So AC and I met when our joint friend put out a call to play Dungeons and Dragons. Ironically, not in their mom's basement, but at their mom's house.
Yes.
And I had wanted to join a table for a while, and so AC and I joined. AC immediately stole my character idea.
Okay, first of all, we didn't know each other at all, and we came to the same table with the same character idea. I didn't steal anything.
Stole it. Correct. So we had separately come to the same table with the same exact character idea, with the same exact goal for the characters. And our decision at that time was AC can play this character, but they're never going to be able to get rid of me. And so we became twins, heavily inspired by X-Files characters, and
Correct.
were inseparable characters from session 0.
And I think, Alex, you left out only one detail that I think is funny and important. I found this group by responding to a Facebook post.
Amazing.
So a Facebook post in a like DC queer like Facebook group, Queer Exchange is what it's called, I think. Many cities have these, right? Where like just like queer folks post about stuff that they need or they want to sell or whatever. And after I'd moved to DC, I'd been looking for a new Dungeons and Dragons table to join, knowing that was something that I wanted to do. And like it seemed like a good way to make friends in a new city. And I was right. So I responded to a Facebook post, filled out a Google form, sent some emails back and forth, and then drove to a random person's house in Virginia to play Dungeons and Dragons with them and see if I vibed with these people. And now, like almost fully 3 years later, a little bit more than that, I think that the answer was for sure yes. We all caught a vibe. Okay, Matt, like what is your experience with D&D? I think that like I'm curious, like have you ever played D&D?
I've never played D&D proper. I'm trying to remember what this was. It was...
I like that proper was included in this. I'm very interested to see into what dalliance into D&D you had, Matt.
So I have a lot of other media dives into D&D, like more of like awareness mostly. Like I was aware of like the Salvatore books, like knew some of those characters and like generally what their vibe was. Weirdly, my husband's like one of his favorite characters is Dritz. Like that, I have the magic card for him on his desk that I gave him. But playing tabletop, I have never played D&D, but I went in like 2004 around the same time because of a friend that AC knows. I played both the game Mutants and Masterminds, which was like an explicit superhero themed ripoff of D&D.
Okay.
Great.
And I also played the Star Wars tabletop RPG at that time. The thing I remember most about the one session that I did of the Star Wars RPG was that I grappling hooked somebody into a lightsaber.
Hell
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's so funny because by contrast, the first sessions of D&D that I ever played, I almost got murdered by what's called a shambling mound, which is just like a hill that is animated.
Just an angry bush.
It's just like a bunch of dirt and like sticks and stuff. And my level 1 character absolutely got their ass walloped.
See, Drew just kind of let me do it because he thought it was cool. He was like, sure, you can do that.
And honestly, that's a vibe.
It is cool.
This is like a very so I think that we've done enough level setting here. Alex has also, in addition to being my twin in one of our home games, also has game mastered a number of the games that I have played in, including one-shots and game mastering our current campaign. Our other game master, Clay, was originally supposed to join us today, but is sick. Shout out, Clay. Hi, we love you.
What's up, Clay?
Hey, Clay.
I would love to know, like, Alex, how did you start playing D&D?
Yeah, so the way a lot of things in my life happened, I started playing D&D for a toxic ex
Solid.
because he really wanted to play and
Yeah.
I really wanted to see what it was about. And I had consumed a lot of Critical Role at that point in time and thought that maybe after 200 hours of this media content, I'm ready to do it myself. And so he and I played. And then when we broke up, I wasn't able to join a table again. But I have now been long distancing a session over Facebook and now Discord. We've been doing the same game with my friends from Jesus Camp. So that's a lot to unpack. I believe we're going into our 8th year this month.
Wow.
So we've been playing this one game for a very long time. And it's been really great to see the other players like grow and change. And so that's how I started. I had a toxic ex who then I had a really kind friend who was like,
Boo.
I heard you like this. Do you want to try again?
And that's pretty normal, right, Alex? Like if you have a home game this is a game that you play for years and years with people.
Yeah, it is both normal and I would say abnormal. A lot of games run into scheduling conflicts, mostly because being an adult is hard, or they fizzle out after a couple of years. But the DM Dungeon Master, Game Master can be interchangeable. They had a very clear vision for the story and a group of friends who really wanted to go with them on that story. And it's been a great way to stay connected to those people. That's the only time I talk to them.
Yeah.
And so we all looked at it under that eye, and now we've stayed together for 8 years. So we've gone through someone's gender transitions, kidney surgery, Crohn's disease, job changes, moving across the country. And if it wasn't for this one game, we wouldn't stay connected in this way.
Yeah. That's really cool. I think this is also a natural segue. Well, I guess maybe I should say when I started playing D&D.
That sounds good. You should tell us
being
that.
like the shambling mound or whatever. So, one of the things that, speaking of regretful choices that we make in our youth, I was invited to play Dungeons and Dragons multiple times when I was in high school. I played other tabletop RPGs that were arguably nerdier because my reasoning for not doing Dungeons and Dragons was like, I'm a nerd, but I can't be that kind of nerd, which is so embarrassing because the tabletop RPGs that I was playing were things like Diplomacy and Shogun.
All those
Games
people
where
were also playing D&D.
Yeah, they were.
Correct. They were. They were. And they were inviting me to play with them. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not. I can't be that also.
This was me and Magic until 3 years ago. Like, I was like, I don't know that I'm like a Magic guy. Meanwhile, or not meanwhile, but now there's 6,000 cards in that room back there.
So eventually I grew up. I spent a lot of time, learning about myself, deciding what it was that I wanted to do. And I met a couple of friends, my friend Travis and my friend Aaron. Aaron is actually currently a player in Alex and I's current game. But meeting the two of them was the first time that I met people who I really connected with personally, who were also people interested in D&D. And Travis helped us get together a small game that we started playing in 2019. That's one of those games that fizzled out because of scheduling conflicts and the pandemic. Folks didn't want to move the game online, that kind of stuff. But that was my first introduction to D&D, and I immediately fell in love with the game. Like Alex, I had been watching hours and hours of D&D content before I started playing. My entry point was actually going from Matt, our mutual friend Emily Nielsen, posted about the Adventure Zone, which is the McElroy's podcast. So I'd been listening to that pretty early on because Emily was a longtime fan of the McElroy brothers and was posting about it early in the Adventure Zone's creation.
Sounds like Emily.
Yeah, very much, very much. Then from there, I had found Dimension 20 because the McElroys were on a early season of Dimension 20.
A very good season, might I add.
A very good season that is, I think, often underappreciated by
I
Dropout
agree.
fans.
Which one is it?
It is the toys one. What is it called?
Tiny Heist.
Tiny Heist. It's delightful. Rick Diggins, forever and ever.
I'm going to pour one out for Rick Dickens after this episode. I'm going to be honest.
For real.
I think with the amount of D&D content that is out in the internet now and just easily consumable, it's taken a lot of those stereotypes that I think AC you saw when you were younger of like, that's very nerdy. I'm not that kind of nerd. I'm not touching that. That's for gross boys in their gross boy basement. So the content and the accessibility of watching people play Dungeons and Dragons in clean, well lit, well articulated spaces, I think is a huge gift to people who are afraid of what people might think about them. But now you have like crazy long running podcasts, crazy long running YouTube series where not only has that cultural moment manifested, but it's made the entry so much easier.
Yeah, 1,000%. And there are like, I want to use this as our segue to like the storytelling of it all and like the settings. One of the things that I think is so fun about Dungeons and Dragons live play content is that it really has successfully shown the breadth of what D&D can be and can do. So I said at the beginning that most people describe D&D as a fantasy game, right? The archetypes, the basic rule systems, they are all reliant upon, not the archetypes, the classes and things like that. Those are all reliant on archetypes of fantasy. So the ranger, the bard, the rogue meet in a dark and seedy tavern, and they go on a quest to defeat the evil Lord Sauron. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding. That is also right. So Alex, you have come up with some of like the most creative settings that I have gotten the joy of playing within. Our original home game that we were a part of was set in a post-apocalyptic world where we played superheroes based on the Join the Party, another great podcast, D&D podcast, the Join the Party homebrew rule set. But Alex, you've also come up with games where we have been goth kids in a mall running amok. We did a cruise ship shenanigans game. What is your process for like thinking of these settings of a game, and like maybe what's the most fun setting you've ever played in?
So for sure the most fun setting that I've played in was the cruise ship-esque one shot that you and Clay, shout out Clay, feel better, did. It was a very simple promise. A group of sea hags charmed a migrating dragon turtle, which had a utopian-like sex-like cruise ship on its back, and we're steering it for capitalism, basically trying to make rent prices exist and then go up. And there's nothing new under the sun. And so there are a lot of other places that have given me these ideas. That particular session was inspired by another great Dungeons and Dragons podcast called Kill Every Monster, where they particularly discuss some of the more problematic monsters that exist in the monster manual, how we can unproblematize them, and then they do a very small session where one character just tries to kill that monster as they fixed it. And they were talking about bioluminescence. And I had been really interested in Will of the Wisps for a while. And I was like, well, you know what's kind of like bioluminescence? Will o' the Wisps. I could take that and put it underwater. So it's kind of like a jellyfish. What can I do next with that? So that's where that whole basis grew out of connecting those two small dots. And the mall kid that you spoke about goes also back to my hatred of capitalism. I worked at Kmart during peak Black Friday era. And there's nothing more I wanted than to destroy said Kmart. And so I saw a great post on Tumblr that said, if you ever need a dungeon, have you ever looked at abandoned mall maps? And I said, I will look at that abandoned mall map and I will make a scary mall full of very interesting things. And so we took the same archetypes that exist in like teen movies and adapted them to archetypes in D&D. And you'll not be surprised to know that they overlap pretty easily, and went from there with those.
We did blow up a Sears in that game. So
Nice.
Not a Kmart, but we did blow up the Sears.
But you will
that's really
notice
cool.
they are owned by the same company.
That's really cool. A video game that I really enjoyed called Cassette Beasts had a setting of an abandoned mall, and I was surprised to see how well it used that setting in not just like isn't this like a spooky liminal space, but in more of like it used its own lore within that space too. So I can see how that could work.
Yeah, it was not to toot my own horn, but I was very impressed with what I did with it. For example, like in the Sears, there's always these great jokes about how like a Sears is where a dad goes. That's where the dads live. And so instead of playing Dungeons and Dragons while we were in said Sears, we adapted we played the McElroy game, the Dadlands. And so when we went into separate stores, separate rules applied. So this is something we didn't get to do, but the Hollister, if you remember them in 2012, they're very dark. That was going to be completely employed. Only Drow worked there. Like the Forever 21, there was a doppelganger that was a mannequin. Very Terminator 2 is one of my favorite movies of all time. And so like every store had its own little arc that the characters could go into if they so choose. The Spirit Halloween store, the leftover costumes that were there were, animated armor, which is like a monster in D&D just reskinned to fit where they were.
It's giving Buffy. In the best way, complimentary.
Joss Whedon only slightly mentioned.
I love this. And I think some of the other things that are like worth saying at the top is like it's a lot of work to put together a setting like that. It is hours and hours of creativity coming from game masters. And then there's also like creativity that comes from players and the improv of it all, right? Like these settings are incredible in from the jump, but some of what is also the most fun is like seeing other players interact with the setting and ask questions that you would never think to ask. You know, one of the greatest things about our table is we have like a real diversity of like problem solving thoughts. And there are people at our table who are like ready to rush in and just like use their fists to solve a problem, or people like me who are more likely to do interrogation and like really spend time trying to solve a puzzle without using brute force. Or there are people who land somewhere in the middle, right? Willing to get up in the mix, but not necessarily sure what the right choice to take, what the right choice to make is. And honestly, I say the right choice. One of the cool things about D&D is there are very few, as long as you are operating within the boundaries that your table has set for one another, there are very few wrong choices. Everything has a consequence, good or bad, but there are very few wrong choices. You can make the right choice and then totally fail your role and still experience the bad consequence. I say with experience.
Yeah. I probably should have said this when you asked me about like my experience with Dungeons and Dragons, but I've played a little bit of Baldur's Gate 3. And I was often making decisions to talk my way out of things because I was like a little intimidated by the fights. But that only works when you roll well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you end up having to fight anyway. And sometimes it's harder because I tried to talk myself out of it the first time.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct. And so this is the like the social interaction. What did I say the other one was? Exploration, combat, right? And the relationship between social interactions and combat, right? The like, oh, you want to fight, and like being able to de-escalate that situation, maybe, but maybe you try to de-escalate and it doesn't work and you're just getting punched, right? And then what do you do?
And there are some situations where de-escalating is never the answer, unfortunately. The shambling mound that you spoke about earlier, AC, it doesn't speak any language. It doesn't comprehend any language. It only knows consume. And so a good DM is going to look at their players and say, this is the type of adventure that you want. Sometimes you do just want to hit the shambling mound to pieces. Sometimes you do want to solve a puzzle. And everyone's going to have a different way to do it, which is why I am so blessed to co-DM with Clay right now, because Clay is very incredibly intent on making sure that before we start the game, you as the player say what you want out of this campaign. And then as we develop the setting, the major arcs, we're incorporating that. And then after the game, after each and every session, debrief. Did you feel included? Did you feel welcomed? Did you feel valued as a player and as a character? And if the answer to those questions are no, it's on the DM to look at that and do better for the next session, because we're all here to have fun. We're all here to play make-em-ups with our friends. And if you don't feel valued in your imagination, you're going to run away from D&D. You're going to run away from a lot of different role playing, and you're going to be afraid to look at your own imagination and your own adventures because of that. And so the goal is to make sure everyone's imagination feels valued. Is everyone's imagination come to the right answer? No, but that's okay.
Yeah. The flaws are what make it fun, right? Like it is actually part of basic D&D rules that you should choose flaws for your character, values for your character. Because some of what makes a game interesting is saying, actually, my character's fatal flaw is that they will do literally anything to make a certain goal happen. And that might be at the expense of the other party. Folks need to know that going in, right? They need to know my fatal, maybe, right? Like they need to know my fatal flaw is when given the opportunity to pursue my goal or to do what the party asks, I am going to choose pursuing my goal. And when I say the party may need to know that, if in your session 0, you set boundaries where it's like, if this is going to be the kind of thing where someone's going to split off, I'd like to know that up front. Or it will just become evident in the game, right? Mm-hmm. Based on the player's actions.
And that is dependent on the conversations you have in that session 0, right?
Yeah.
I play for when I'm a player, I don't want to know your flaws as another character. I don't want to know your value system. I want to learn that through role playing. I want to
Yeah.
be confused, angry, upset that you are going through that goal, because then you've given so much breadth and depth to your character that my character's breadth and depth feels matched.
Yeah. And like that's also something fun. So session 0, for those who aren't familiar, is like the thing that you do before you start playing your game. Not every game does one, but many games do. It is the space where maybe players bring multiple character ideas to a table and say, which one seems to fit this setting? Or maybe the DM asks folks world building questions to help flesh out certain areas. Sometimes in a session 0, you bring both ideas for your character and ideas for non-player characters or NPCs, right? And those get folded and incorporated into the game as part of that collaborative storytelling. Sometimes the DM is working out of a pre-written book, or there may be like you're so familiar with each other as players that you don't choose to have a session 0. Not every game has a session 0. So I think I do want to talk more about our safety tools and the ones that we use in our game, because I think they're really valuable. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk a little shit. And I would like to know, what classes do you main, and what's your favorite homebrew class?
Oh boy. My main is always a cleric. The eldest daughter trauma is the most apparent in the cleric, and that's where I'm always coming to. But there isn't a homebrew class or feature that I prioritize over everything. I do have a cleric where I saw a great tweet online that was a cursed object that's just called Thoughts and Prayers, where one side if you hit, it does +5 psychic damage, and the other side if you hit, it does +5 radiant damage. And and I thought that was very funny.
Amazing.
And so my Dwarven cleric's Warhammer now does that depending on which side that he hits from. And
Incredible.
I have no shame. There are people online who are funnier than me, and so I'm gonna borrow their ideas.
Hell yeah. This actually, I was going to say this earlier when we were talking about the cruise ship game, but I'm going to say it now instead. Did you figure out my secret joke, or did I tell you my secret joke in that game?
No.
Okay, so in our cruise ship game, I played a sea elf bard with light green skin named Timrek.
I know this one.
I don't get it.
Timrek is Kermit backwards. I was Kermit the Frog.
Stop it. Wow.
I was waiting for my moment.
So good.
I was waiting for my moment to rip out my ukulele and sing the Rainbow Connection at the table, just to have everyone realize what was going on.
Did you have your ukulele with you?
Yeah, or maybe I had a flute. I don't know. Whatever my bard instrument
sorry,
was.
I misunderstood. I thought you AC brought a ukulele to my house, and I did not notice. And I was like, "Wow, you really pulled that one over me."
I could have done it. I could have. Anyway,
wool over my eyes. I am a sheep.
So I was gonna say I want to talk about class because like I have thoughts and how like when I have delved into D&D, it has actually screwed me over. I really my anxiety takes a lot of different shapes, and one way that it takes shape is that I often will play mage classes, one because I'm gay, two because I prefer ranged combat because it's scary to get up close. And like I'm playing a game called Fantasy Life, which was like Animal Crossing plus like really basic combat right now, and I'm mostly maining a magician in that game because that's how I like to play these kinds of things. Got into Baldur's Gate 3, chose one of the cast, I don't remember which class it was, but it was like probably the most difficult class I could have chosen that did magic.
Does Baldur's Gate 3 have wizards?
Yes.
And was it a wizard?
It was a wizard.
Wow. Took the words right out my mouth.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I quit playing that game was because the class I chose was too difficult. I'm going to get back to it. If Steven, you're listening to this, I'm going to be a swords bard and we're going to do it, but it's going to happen.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah. But yeah, that is the class that I tend to play just like when there are classes available.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm going to keep relating stuff to Magic the Gathering just because
That's normal.
there's so much DNA here that is similar. But I find that because I've gotten deep in that game and I know the rules a lot better and I know like the possibility space, I actually play that game very differently. Like the decks I tend to go for that I have to stop building are just like, they call it big stompy. You're just throwing bodies at people, right? And the stuff that I've gotten into more recently the closest equivalent it would be something like a lich, would be I am draining essence from someone in some way, or from the table if we're playing commander, right? And those are fun to me, and it's just interesting that the mechanics of that game make me a different player than video games with classes in them or tabletop games with classes in them.
Yeah. I, like you, am gay and prefer caster classes. I think that it feels really hard for me to say if there's a class that I main because I still feel like I have played very little D&D in the grand scheme of things. Like I have spent most of my time playing one of two classes. Either a druid or a bard. My first game, I played a ranger. I was really bad at that. It turns out I'm really bad at physical ranged combat, but I'm good at casting ranged combat. And it's like some of it is about learning how your brain thinks about those scenarios. It was too hard for me to think about like, I need to be back here and knock my arrow and shoot that way. When I was a ranger or thinking about a ranger in combat. But it is really easy for me to think about, like, what do people with magic do in combat? How do they run and hide? What do they do to get out of sticky situations? So love a druid. I'm currently playing for the first time a monk. And while we haven't gotten to do a ton of combat yet, I'm really excited about this monk build. It's very interesting. And it is a challenge to myself, right? Because a monk is inherently the opposite of a ranged fighter. For context in D&D, a monk is one of those melee classes where there are very, very few ways to do damage when you are more than 5 feet away from your enemy. If you are more than 5 feet away from your enemy, you are having to do something else or something creative. There is very limited options other than getting in there and punching them in the face. And so it's really interesting. I think my druid was also a homebrew class that I am very preferential to from that Join the Party game. It is a Circle of Spirits druid, so it has a ghost boy flavor. Join the Party describes it as like if Danny Phantom was a D&D player.
And you can see why I wanted that character now. Dear listener at home.
Oh, hello, Zuzu. Sorry, an interlude for the cat. And Matt, to your point, I've always wanted to play a wizard, but because I absolutely love Caleb Widogast from campaign 2 of Critical Role, one of our problematic faves. Caleb Widogast, maybe Critical Role.
Critical Role too.
Problematic fave, whatever. And it is so intimidating to play a wizard. It takes so much work. It takes hard.
It takes a lot of work. And I think that what is great about finite classes in Dungeons and Dragons is that there are different ways to think for different people. I have in the game that I was mentioning earlier that we're going on to year 8, one of my friends has anxiety and has gone through a lot of different med changes and isn't always able to pay attention during the games. And was incredibly new at playing D&D. And so they chose a barbarian. There are only 2 options really when you're a barbarian. You hit something with your fist or you hit something with your weapon. And so they knew that every time their turn came up in combat, that's what they were going to be doing. Unless another character specifically asked them to do something. And so that pressure on what spell do I cast? what weapon do I use? All of this was removed from them until they grew like up in the and until they gained levels in the classes where more things became available and they were more comfortable with not only the other players but also that class. And
Yeah.
so if you hate commitment like me and need to have a cleric so you can change your spells every day, that's there for you. If you like consistency and you only want to be able, you're like, I like these 3 spells. A warlock seems great, I guess. I played that.
There was opinion in that.
Alex played a warlock cleric multi-class in our game where we are twins.
And I will note, I became a cleric later in the game because I was tired of only having 3 spells.
And because you maybe pledged your soul to a dark entity deep under our city, but who knows?
I pledged my soul to the deep entity under the city so I could have more spells. It's pretty one-to-one.
Pretty straightforward.
Pretty
Yeah.
straightforward. My character choices were much more in depth, but me as a player, that was my clear choice. DM, can I please do this?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this gets to like, I think coming back around to the safety tools, this gets to like some of the reason why our table uses safety tools is because the most important thing is that it's a game and it should be fun, right? And making sure that it's fun can be, I'm really enjoying this character, except that I'm being hamstrung by only knowing 3 spells. I'd like to be able to do more spells, right? Or I'm having fun, except I feel like my player isn't getting a turn to talk at the table, right? I'm having fun, but I made a choice that I really feel terrible about the consequences of, and I'd like to reconsider, can we go back and like, can we undo that decision? And can we have a conversation as a table? So, in our game, we use the windows, veils. What's the third thing, Alex?
I should know this. Lines.
Windows, veils, and lines as our framing for our boundaries in our game. We do this as part of our session 0. So lines are things that do not put this in the game. Do not have our game include child violence. Do not have our game include
no pet violence, no child violence, no transphobia.
Mind control, no transphobia, no homophobia, no sexism, no racism, right? There can be themes of inequality, right? There can be other themes of inequality or imbalance, right? But it is never going to be about things that we experience in the real world.
Our veils are things that can exist, but will fade to black. A clean example is if these 2 characters want to go smooch, that's great. We're not going to role play it. We're not going to look at it. You can just say, this is what our characters are doing, and then that fades to black. Versus the windows, which is transparent, see-through. This is what's happening in the game. This is what we're okay with. Things like, I can only think of the hard lines in our current game. For example, a whiteboard. Writing on a whiteboard is a window. Writing on a chalkboard is a line. If you went to school in public school, you know why.
Yeah. Or I think veils are also things that happen just generally off screen. So maybe in someone's backstory, there is a theme of religious trauma, and it's part of why they're a cleric today, right? But that religious trauma won't necessarily be explored in depth in the game, even if it's part of like the character's inner thoughts, because that's not something that all of us want to play out at the table in front of us, right? And I think that so we also use like stoplight cards, right? Because we have folks with varying levels of like occasionally going nonverbal or like getting overwhelmed or overstimulated. Folks who have trouble finding the socially appropriate moment to interject and say, hey, wait, I want to slow down. So we use those like red, yellow, green cards to signal I'm good. I want to keep moving forward, even if I'm being quiet, or yellow, like, hey, can we pause for a second? I want to check in about something. And red to say game needs to stop. I want to have a check-in before we move on.
And I want to say that, Clay, feel better. These are a lot of Clay's
Yes.
really, really intentional decisions. Um, we have these because in the game that AC and I shared, um, a terrible decision was made. A character accidentally killed an NPC just in broad daylight in front of God and everybody, and that was not their intent, and they weren't able to articulate that beforehand. And so we had to go back and redo that whole event because of how uncomfortable it made not only that player, but it made the rest of the table. And
Yeah.
Mm.
so DMing, for anyone who thinks they should do it or want to do it, or their friends think they should do it, it's really trial and error. And as long as you establish some form of safety with your friends, these mistakes are going to happen. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
And like the style of the DM in terms of player safety, but also in terms of like the type of story that they're telling really can vary, right? There are some DMs like Matthew Mercer who are going to make you role play the entirety of the travel. They're going to make you roll for every event on the events table, and it is going to be grueling. But there are other DMs like Brennan Lee Mulligan who are going to say, you travel onward. Occasionally, there might be a travel interlude if there's a particular battle they want to play out, but like story oriented versus experience oriented or different styles of play. And I think Alex, one of the things, and Matt, I'm curious if you have any similar like analogies here, right? Like, but retconning in a game, right, is many players would say is like antithetical to how you should play D&D.
Yeah, the whole time you've been talking about like player safety, I've been thinking about Rule Zero, which is a concept in Commander, a Magic format. And basically, what Rule Zero actually means is that any rule in the game can be changed if the table agrees.
Yeah.
Love it.
And that's not how it gets talked about. Usually it gets talked about as we're sitting down at a table and we want to agree the kinds of decks we're going to play because maybe I'll just give an example that everyone tends to hate. Mass land destruction. You don't want to just like completely cut off everyone's game 8 turns in. Or you might set a rule that I don't know. I've never played at a table like this, but maybe you might set a rule that decks over $40 aren't allowed, right? Those are the kinds of things, but normally the way that conversation takes shape is, hey, this is what I'm thinking of playing. What are you all thinking of playing? And then it's, oh, I'm thinking about playing this. It's like, oh, well, if you do that, I'm going to do this. I might have a chance against that. And then you might say, well, my deck has 3 tutors in it. That means I can go search for specific cards versus, this deck doesn't have any of them. And that kind of gets to a power level to the point that like there's an official power bracket these days that is meant to be used in Rule Zero conversations. It's not meant to be like a hard and fast like rule based line. These are always 5s, these are always 1s or whatever. But it's more like you're having a conversation with someone. You're like, well, this is technically a 2, but to be honest, it plays like a 3. So watch out. But you can also have a conversation with your table and say, you know what? I know there's this really specific rule about vehicles, but we kind of have this house rule. What do you all think about that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And everyone can just be like, yeah, that's fine. Doesn't really change my experience. And you can play the game that way. That is the way that I see safety in my games specifically. I think you brought up video games, AC. That is harder. Those lines are harder to draw, right? I think if you're playing competitive online multiplayer, some games have like character bans or hero bans, but that's mostly for the really competitive play, which I'm not really into anyway. But yeah, I don't know. Those are the parallels I'm drawing from these conversations.
Yeah.
I want to say something that's like not crazy radical, but maybe is it's we play the idea to play an incredibly competitive, grueling game is incredibly capitalistic. You have to buy this. You have to buy like this rule deck, and you have to play it to the full extent. And only you gets to make the decisions about what your character's doing and what your imagination's doing and what you're doing. And it's very like the same way that we don't let Like I'm thinking about the intramural soccer team that my partner plays on. He plays on
Mm,
level 3, which is the lowest one because it's not fun for him to play against a level 2, a D2 game, a D2 team where they get beat every single game. Like we're here
yeah.
to have fun. We're here to
Yeah.
play games with each other and to be with each other, and not having these kind of like boundary safety conversations really like isolates you from the potential for greater imagination, for greater
Yeah.
fun, for greater collaboration, for greater storytelling. And if we want to believe that the stories we tell ourselves dictate our reality and dictate how we interact with each other outside of the table space, why do I want a story that's not community oriented, that's not
Yeah.
community built, that's not built with safety and love? Because that's a story I want to tell myself, and that's a story I want to invest in my community and in with my friends building. And then I can take that and do the next step of bringing it out of the table into my relationships out of the table,
Yeah.
because it makes us a better person when we get to do things together, when
Yeah.
we aren't angry all the time that like I only have $40 to buy this deck, you spent $200 on this deck. Like that, the amount of resentment that
Mhm.
exists because we don't actively and collaboratively set boundaries, storylines, goals, things like that is part, I don't know, maybe part of the problem of America.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to speak
Maybe.
to some. I want to speak to something specifically. I'm going to keep using this Magic the Gathering. So, what another way that we make space for stuff like that is people use this to refer to like counterfeit cards, but we call them proxies. And really, what it is just like any card that represents an actual Magic the Gathering card. Proxy can be as simple as writing the name of another card on like a cheap land, or it can be a full like printed, like well printed copy or something. And allowing those at tables is like a really powerful way to include people and play the game that you want to play.
Yeah.
Now, that said, sometimes you make a proxy because the card is expensive, and it's expensive because it's overpowered. And that can be a problem when you are too lenient with these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, there's a capitalist side of this, which is that at Wizard sponsored stores, you should never use proxies because those stores can get in trouble and lose that status, and then it hurts their bottom line.
Yeah.
So don't do that at places that you love. But anyway, it's interesting. I'm loving the concepts of making space for each other in the game as a way to seek out the things you're looking for. I don't know. I know we're like waiting to talk about shows and whatnot, but it's something I see just at like in like live play scenarios too, of like tables making space for each other, even though it's a performance in that aspect.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we're dancing around it. We've done mentions. I think it's time. I think let's talk about our favorite live play. I mean, I think that Tiny Heist was my intro, but Matt, to your point, one of the things that, you know, there is a lot of controversy to the earliest years of Critical Role streaming. But one of the things that I have loved about watching even that earlier stuff is, aside from one person who ultimately left the table, that table of people are clearly close friends in a way that informs their gameplay. And we're also always willing to let one or two people take the spotlight. There are whole episodes where some people may, which Critical Role, to be clear for folks who have never watched Critical Role, I say an episode, they are usually 4+ hours of content.
So get your popcorn out. Get ready.
In 4 hours of play, some characters will only have 10 or 15 minutes of conversational active time, right? They may be a very minor player in an episode because it's very heavily focused on one character's storyline. And watching how they naturally balance that even from early on is really aspirational, right? It teaches a player like me and a person like me who is always ready to raise their hand when there is a quiet moment that there can be space for stepping back and letting other folks take that hero role and still have it be a good story and a fun experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I will also say, like, Critical Role was my introduction to Dungeons and Dragons content. And it is very clear from the very beginning that these people are having a lot of fun and they're working really hard, like in that kind of grind set mentality for other people to see that they're having fun too.
Yeah.
And I am incredibly happy for them at the success that they have found at the Critical Role Foundation. But now for me, it's a time for me to step back from it. And sometimes I will still watch the live shows, and hearing the soundtracks will still make me cry because I'm just so happy and so proud of them. But also, like, you have so much money now. I'm going to go listen to very smaller places.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the live play content that I consume now is through podcast form. It's easier to listen on the Metro. And so some of my favorites have been, as I mentioned earlier, Kill Every Monster. Huge fan of the way that they look at the monster manual, the way that they look at the issues in Wizards of the Coast, and then play just a 2-person game afterwards. Fascinating content. I also am a huge fan of Very Random Encounters. They play more than just Dungeons and Dragons. They do a lot of different rule sets. They've done Kids on Bikes. They've done the Star Wars game that you mentioned earlier, Matt. That's very fun because they randomize everything. Everything is from a generator. So that's very exciting. And I also have enjoyed Bombarded, which is an Oops All Bards show with an actual band.
That's so fun.
So they're bands. They started the show. They're bards, and then they multi-class they multi-class, and
so they don't die.
So they don't die. So they have more fun, and every single show they write an original song with chord dice, so randomized chords, and then these professional touring musicians write a song about their little D&D stuff.
Amazing.
That's rad as hell.
Very, very cute. And of course our boys, AC knows I'm a McElroy family slut. I love a lot of their work. I will say, if you're looking to learn the rules of Dungeons and Dragons, don't touch it. The Adventure Zone is very fun, but it is not good for learning rules if you're somebody who has to watch to learn or listen to learn.
I have recently finally started listening to Versus Dracula.
So good.
And it's so funny. It's like a setting where it's like, if like the Hollywood studios monsters all lived in the same world kind of thing, or Universal Studios, not Hollywood Studios. Sorry. The other one, but like, there's like just tons and tons of like horror references. The other thing about like the Adventure Zone and like the difference in some of the live play podcasts that I like is how much they are like a comedy show versus how much they are playing Dungeons and Dragons. You know, I think the best example of this that people are often critical of how Dimension 20 bends the rules to tell a like funnier story. And I think my argument there is what it always is, which is it's literally a game and they agreed on the rules beforehand and they're literally there to have fun.
And you hired a bunch of comedians. Tell a story. What did you think was going to happen?
Even Critical Role, which is acclaimed as like the live play thing, is a bunch of jokes. Like some of the most iconic. Anyway, so if you don't want a comedy-based game as your live play content, there is so much other content out there for you. Worlds Beyond Number, which is some of the same people who do Dimension 20, Brennan Lee Mulligan, Erica Ishii, Lou Wilson, and Abria Iyengar. You know, they run an incredible game over on Worlds Beyond Number. It's also not my cup of tea. That doesn't make it any less good, but it's not for me. And I think that like so much of what I have taken away from D&D is like how expansive it is and how good and useful it is to be able to say, I love that concept and it's not the one that I want, right? Like, I love the idea of playing in like a Dracula castle world, but I don't want to play in one, actually. Like, I like the idea of it, but I don't want to play in one. Or that it can be funny. And one of the other things, and then I'll get off my soapbox as much as anyone who's done an hour plus of recording on a soapbox
it's your podcast.
Do. That's right. It's my podcast. You'll listen to me. Is that like the humor at the tables, even when it's like they are comedians and it is a little bit like funnier, humor at the table is like a natural part of playing. I've never ever been at a table where we were playing D&D and there wasn't someone who did just a little bit at just the wrong moment, and it was the funniest thing that any of us have ever experienced, right? Like, you don't know what else to say, so you say oops, or you don't know what else to say, so you say uh-oh, you know?
or you say hot boys have IBS, and then your friends still don't let you live down the fact that you had to take a weird shit. I don't know.
Listen.
Matt,
it happens, okay?
What are some of your live play shows that you like to watch?
So I AC knows this and I've talked about it on the show many times, but for a long time, the reason that I didn't play, listen to, watch anything tabletop was because I had like a full body cringe experience anytime someone was like acting as a character. I've been on stages my entire life. I'm really comfortable acting on stages. That's not the thing. It's the casual context of it. And then also doing the acting that like, it was absolutely a me thing, not a judgment. I was just, I can't be in this room. I can't be in this headspace.
I feel that
which was
so deeply.
Yeah. Like when I played that Star Wars game in 2004, the reason that we didn't keep playing was because I was uncomfortable, like even my friend asking me questions and having to make decisions. Like that was like, I couldn't make myself comfortable with that. When people started talking about Worlds Beyond Number, to kind of paint a picture of how recent this was, I tried it out because people talked it up in the TWG Discord, and I listened to like one of their first preview episodes, and somebody started crying about something that I didn't really understand the story or like why they were crying, and I was so squicked out. I'd like I like these shows now, and I still won't go back to that one. But then I tried, I was like, you know what? I'm going to get comfortable with this. And the first thing that I enjoyed was Friends at the Table's world building episode for their Songfiel season. And I could listen to world building shows for like days, months. Like, the idea that you are building a world and you're not necessarily in character. Sometimes you are. Sometimes that's how that game plays, right? But you are building a space and a setting together. That was perfectly for me. And in fact, I tried to go listen to that season after their world building episodes. I was like, I'm not uncomfortable with this. Is kind of boring.
It's good to know what you like.
Yeah.
Good to know thyself.
Yeah. The one that got me was actually Into the Aether's Patreon bonus, Out of the Realm. And that's because those are my friends.
Yeah.
they're doing the show, and I know these people and I understand them as people and what they're bringing to each of their characters. So like hearing Chase be like the kind of like dumb jock guitar guy, right? Like I was like, I could see how that vibe fits
Yeah.
Chase. Love you,
Yeah.
Chase. But I could see how that vibe fits Chase, right? And hearing Steven get to DM, which honestly, I'm glad that audio just exists in the world and we get to hear Steven DM because he's such a great storyteller and just a great person to listen to generally.
Yeah.
That I really loved those 3 episodes, and that they managed to tell such a really cool story in 3 episodes really got me in. That was then my gateway to Never Stop Blowing Up.
Yeah.
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 And the thing that I've realized is that I love a really rules light, story based, character based live play show.
Yeah.
To the point that like we were at AwesomeCon AC and I was like kind of toying with the idea of playing in one of the Never Stop Blowing Up tables, but then they were completely full like 5 minutes that the con started, right? I loved how goofy that season was maybe that's why I was so comfortable with the role play aspect too, was because it was absurd.
Yeah.
It was nothing but absurd. It was always going to be absurd. It was purely to make Izzy laugh, right? Like that. And like I had
the only goal of that season, I think, was to make Izzy go into labor prematurely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and
it.
like I also already knew, quote unquote, parasocially those people
Yeah.
from Game Changer, right? And then that kind of got me into Misfits and Magic, which was like a slower watch for me.
Yeah.
But I really like watching Bria. I think she's really good. And then when 2 came out, I was like, oh, this table has they've all played together in other ways, but like in this story have played together so well for so long. I was like, okay, I'm really into this. Even in like an episode where I don't feel anything has happened, I was like, okay, well, Lou's character's going through this, so this is what he's gonna do. And Erica's characters had this new revelation, and that's what they're gonna do, right? And even though sometimes it's like predictable, we're gonna end in like the power of friendship, right? That's exciting to me, and it's the thing that I was there for.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like when Alex, what you were saying earlier about like the need for it to be enjoyable, the need for it to land in that space, to Matt's point about the power of friendship, right? The need for folks to be having fun, right? Like the thing that I think about the most, unfortunately, is like when I was fighting that shambling mound, like I laugh about it now. It was not a fun experience at the table. And in fact, not 2 sessions later, our DM told us that we'd all gone to sleep and woken up 2 years later and we'd been mind flayed. And we had no idea that that was the story that was going to be told. And that made it not fun, right? And for those who don't know, a mind flayer is a monster that basically can totally like puppet you around for years on end without you ever realizing it. And in that turn, he had made us basically into people that the entire village that we were in feared us, right? Like that we had become basically puppets of the state that we thought we were going to be fighting against, right? And that is not the kind of story that I want to watch, right? Those are not the kind of live play shows that I watch. That was not what I was expecting. I was expecting more like the kind of stories that Alex and I tell together, where capitalism is always the bad guy. And so
Always.
To that point, Dimension 20, but specifically the Unsleeping City, is one of my favorite things to watch over and over and over again. I can always watch the Unsleeping City. I love the idea of a mystical New York. And it was also one of the first city play games that I ever watched and understood how D&D could exist in the context of a modern city or a modern world. Because I am someone who loves the fantasy element. I love the traditional high fantasy sort of setting in a mystical world beyond, right? But Unsleeping City changed my perspective about, and I mean, I guess maybe Tiny Heist did too, because that certainly isn't a traditional setting. They're all tiny toys living in a yard. To get to the point of the episode, the thing that I can't let go of, right, about D&D is it changed the way that I think for better, right? It let me think about and create worlds with my friends to do that like collaborative creativity in a way that I had never experienced before. It's sort of like this I don't know. If you like riffing, you might like D&D, you know? Like if you
If
just
you
like
like improv and math, then this is for you. Simple
okay,
math.
you
Simple
don't
math.
even have to like math that much. Other
You
people will
just,
do the math for
yeah,
you
they
if you
sure
need
will.
to. And there are like I think the other thing is like online tools, right? Like for all of the downsides of Wizards of the Coast, D&D Beyond is a great tool if you're someone for whom doing the math and Roll20, other things that digitally roll the dice for you and do the math based on your character sheet for you, make it all that more accessible to play D&D if that part of the mechanics is the thing that you struggle with, right? And it's fun to figure out and play, my first real character that I love so much was more like me at the creation of the character, and the intent was for that character to be like who I am as a person. And then I watched that character turn into something else entirely, make decisions that I would never make, have reactions that I would never have. And that kind of creativity just like blew my brain wide open in a good way, right? Alex, what's the thing that you can't let go of about D&D?
The thing I can't let go of D&D is when I was a tween, I used to write creatively high fantasy,
Mm,
science fiction across the board, and it was a really huge outlet for me. But as I became a teenager, I was diagnosed. Well, I was not diagnosed, but I suffered from clinical depression until I was diagnosed at 20, in my mid 20s, and wasn't able to access my imagination at all
mm,
during those years. To lose an imagination that would fill up tons of Microsoft Word documents on your desktop, that word to the top of the hills, um, was really, really devastating for me. And D&D has given that back to me. It is a really great tool. I'm nowhere near where I used to be. Like, I can't sit down and write a short science fiction story. But with the rules and the structure that D&D has, I'm able to tap into that potential again and be in my imagination again. And that's why I keep coming back,
yeah,
because I have this now and I'm not going to let it go.
yeah, yeah. Matt, I think that, you're maybe not like can't let go of D&D, right? But like certainly imaginative storytelling is something that you love. Is there something that you like in particular that brings you back to imaginative storytelling?
I just want to respond to the thing that Alex said,
Yeah.
in that, like, I definitely different diagnoses, different settings and scenarios, but like feel that story a lot.
Hmm.
In the places where you can't engage your brain in the way you used to be able to.
Yeah.
Alex, I make YouTube videos about video games. I when people ask me what I do and they don't know my real job or don't know me, I tend to say I'm a games writer these days.
That's what you are, obviously.
Yeah, that's what I am. That's what I mean when I say it. I'm trying to make it myself
Hmm.
believe it. I struggle in very specific ways where I will have really strong periods of creativity and then periods where it is gone.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of ideas right now, but the actual like getting down and writing, I'm like deep in one of those, like I call them ADHD ruts, right? I'm just like on a downswing. And to tie it to your question, AC, I think that something that at least watching others play games like D&D has helped me. One of the ways that that's helped me is understanding different ways of being creative. I was just talking about Misfits and Magic Season 2. I realized I would not be great in a game like that because so much of that particular game is about like breaking things that mean a lot to your character.
Mm.
And that being the way through which they access magic at that period of time. And the decisions they were making on what to break and when, and exactly what they did with the resources they had based on that. I was finding myself like introspecting about like what I would do in the scenarios, and if I would have had the thought right? I become really attached to things in stories generally. One of my favorite video games is Citizen Sleeper, and it's based on this space station. I became so attached to that space station that like I almost couldn't. I was role playing that game, but I was playing as a character that had a lot of my emotions,
Yeah.
right? And like the decisions I made in that game were about wanting to be on that space station, which is to say, like watching those people make decisions I wouldn't make,
Yeah,
provides a possibility space for the creativity that like helps me be creative outside of playing video games or watching those shows. It helps me think, you know, if a Bria was doing this, what would a Bria do, right? And like that's not the words that are coming through my head at the time, but that's the possibilities that I have open to me now.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that like ultimately all of it comes back to it is a game. It is something that we do to have fun with our friends, and all of the like rigidity that exists in the way that Gygax monetized this game, that exists in people who try to gatekeep how you play Dungeons and Dragons, that exists in the people who would say that retconning is like a cardinal sin against this game, right? That all of it is just, it's a game. And we can set our own rules and make our own choices. And like in that way, the other thing that I love about D&D, but specifically the games that Alex and I play together with, you know, big ups to Clay for so much of this, is that like when capitalism is the bad guy in the game, it creates a limitless world of possibility for us to explore the vision of the kind of world that we want to live in, where these are not things that we have to think about. I read explorative fiction and like sci-fi and all of that because I deal with the pains of the real world every day. I do not go to the fantasy world that I've created with my friends to think about you know, the challenges of the world, but that's not to say that the game that I play with my friends doesn't help me move through the world that I live in every day by forming social relationships, by like, honestly, and we didn't even really get into this, as an autistic person, the way that the like set types, right? Like of actions that you can take, like, oh, if you want to look around, that's a perception roll. Oh, if you want to rifle through a drawer, that's an investigation roll, right? Like that there are these different words used to describe specific sets of actions is actually like helpful. And there's a lot of jokes to be made there, you know, but it's a helpful communication tool in my day-to-day life. I can say, oh, I've got a low charisma score right now. Like I'm not going to persuade anyone of anything because I'm so pissed off that I cannot tell someone what's going on.
You don't have the Riz?
Don't
Yeah,
have
I lack the Riz.
But the imitation score is +5.
Yeah, got a big intimidation score right now. So anyway, all of that to say, this is the best. I love this game. I am grateful to the part of me that grew up and like made space for this to be part of my life. And Alex, I love playing D&D with you.
I love playing D&D with you. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah.
Hey, Alex,
Hey,
do
Matt.
you want to be found on the internet?
No.
Good.
No, that rock we mentioned earlier, I wish it was mine.
Yeah.
Cool. Then consider yourself hidden. We will not share where to find you on the internet. AC, where can you be found on the internet?
You can find me on the internet at acfachi.com and acfachi.bisky.social. That's 3 times in a row, Matt, that I've gotten it right.
You did it. You can find me at matthorton.live. There's links to everything there. You've got probably, I think there's a link to this show. There's a link to Flow State, my YouTube show, and all of my social stuff as well. You can find the show at can'tletitgo.gay. You will find our other episode that we're releasing today there and in your podcast feeds. And you'll also find a couple posts on Blue Sky at can'tletitgo.gay. We've talked a lot about other Worst Garbage shows today. So thanks to the Worst Garbage for having us. If you feel like it, you can go support Into the Aether and listen to their Out of the Realm, like 3-parter D&D live play. I had a great time with it. You can also join us in the Worst Garbage Discord at theworstgarbage.online. Find the Can't Let It Go channel, and we'll be chatting about the show there. If you want to support this show and the work that I do on YouTube, you can go to ko-fi.com/Matt Horton. If you set up a recurring monthly donation, you'll get access to this show, but about video games. We call that Can't Put It Down. It's a sometimes video game podcast. Is there anything else either of you want to say before we completely wrap up?
When you come to the Discord, tell me, what character do you main in Dungeons and Dragons? I am dying to know.
And I can't wait to try your favorite cocktail. That's what I'm doing when I get home.
Ooh.
Gin, chartreuse, maraschino, lime.
Okay,
It's
I'm
so
going to the
good.
liquor store first.
Yeah.
Shout out to the people that help us make the show. Scout made our art, and you can pay her to make you something at ko-fi.com/humblegoat. And thanks to my friend Ethan for our music. You can find him at Revolver Ocelot on Blue Sky. Thank you for listening to 2 episodes today. We really appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
TWG, the worst garbage, online.